Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Gender and Development Studies, SOGDS, Bachelor's Degree Programs. Bachelor of Arts, Gender Studies, BAGS. Semester 4. BEGLA-138 Reading and Speaking Skills. Block-1 Learning to Read Effectively. Unit-1 The Reading Process. 1.0 Objectives. This unit aims to develop in the learner the ability to understand and identify the four major skills of the English language, develop a thorough understanding of the heterogeneous modern classroom of today, understand the reading process as well as its application and relevance to myriad and diverse classroom situations, interact with academic content by following the procedural steps of reading, achieve an overview of the different stages in the reading process. Apply the skills and strategies of a successful reader by achieving reading readiness. 1.1 Warm UP. Answer the following questions about reading based on your own opinion and experience. What do you understand by reading? Do you like reading? Why or why not? How often do you read? When and where do you read? What topics and types of matter do you like to read? Newspapers, magazines, novels, comics, etc. Do you like reading in English? Why or why not? How often do you read? In English? What do you or would you like to read about in English? 1 point to the modern classroom environment, an overview. The classroom today is a fluid space. Even as you all pursue a distance education program, you will be receiving certain lectures in your designated study centers or through online platforms. Regardless of regular or distance education, online or offline modality, a classroom as such is not a site for perpetuating undemocratic life. It is not a space for addressing social power. It is not a platform for the display and transmission of the power and knowledge of the educator. It has become a potent site for addressing issues of injustice, inequality, and inadequacy. It has evolved as a very plausible field for initiating processes of reflection, research as a subversive space for empowering the culturally marginalized and economically disenfranchised learners with unbiased knowledge. This can primarily be achieved through reading and discussion since both provide a multiplicity of perspectives and a plethora of insights. Today, an effective language lesson must integrate, primarily through reading and explanation, the content, language, and culture into learning. The 5 C's of an effective lesson in today's language classroom are content, communication, cognition, culture, context. In an article by Michael P. Breen titled The Social Context for Language Learning, a Neglected Situation, Breen highlights the study of classroom language learning from two different perspectives, namely research and teaching. In particular, he interrogates two perspectives. What are the specific contributions of the classroom to the process of language development? In what ways might the teacher exploit the social reality of the classroom as a resource for the teaching of language? Now, considering whether you meet your professors regularly in a regular classroom or you meet them in planned sessions in the distance learning mode, a common answer to both the above questions is that this can be achieved by initiating in the students a culture of reading. There exists a very intricate relationship between the social process of learners and their individual psychological processes, and thus learning can occur twice, first at the social level and next at the individual level, first when it is between people, interpsychological, and thereafter when it occurs within the learner, intrapsychological. In this kind of a socio-cultural intercourse, reading directly influences the psychological development of the learner by continuously integrating the learning experiences of each individual with the group as a whole. It is through consideration of the expectations, values, and beliefs of the learner that the learning group progresses and the learning environment is moderated. There are various metaphors comparing the classroom situation to an experimental laboratory or a discourse podium and even to a choral garden. The first metaphor of the classroom as experimental laboratory is derived from the premise of Stephen Krashen's second language acquisition theory. In order to explain the classroom as experimental laboratory, one must understand the primary function of the language classroom as manifested by the correlation between exposure to a linguistic input through reading and the final learning outcome. The value and purpose of the classroom can produce an optimum input for the reader by providing accurate and relevant information as well as holistic knowledge. As you attend the sessions in your designated study centers, your tutors will help you with useful pointers, recap of important ideas, and suggestions on how to best utilize the textual resources you have received. In both the regular and the distance learning context, the teacher or the tutor is perceived as a surrogate experimental psychologist on whose shoulders lies the responsibility of facilitating comprehension for individual learners and reinforcing positive learning behaviors accordingly by encouraging the learners to read. The distinct process in which an acquisition of a language is through a conscious process of absorbing new facts and retaining the information or skills via formal instructions holds true in the metaphor as proposed by Stephen Krashen, 1982. In the second metaphor of the classroom as discourse, the primary focus is on classroom-oriented research which intends to understand the discourse of classroom communication. It shows the teachers and learners as active readers, engaged with each other whereby the classroom activity and inputs can be explored as a text through reading and discussion. This metaphor reveals much of the specific interaction patterns going on in the particular language learning situations such as teacher-learner negotiation once a passage or text is read. The third metaphor, which explains the classroom as choral garden, derives from Malinowski's classical studies of Trobriand island cultures, describing it in Choral Gardens and Their Magic, Malinowski, 1935. This metaphor articulates the premise that in order to understand a language classroom, observation alone on the surface level of the classroom discourse is inadequate. It is neither practical nor possible to understand the culture of the text just by learning the language or understanding the language by studying the culture and dialects through reading and discourse. The principle of the classroom as a choral garden seeks to emphasize the importance of understanding the classroom situation, which can result in increasing learner engagement, motivation, and participation for the betterment of language learning through reading with a highlighted purpose. It highlights the urgency and necessity of perceiving the classroom as a real place with its own culture to help us exploit its complexity as a resource for language learning, especially through reading and interpretation. There are 8 essential features of the culture of such a language classroom in which learning is achieved through reading and elaboration. This can be perceived as being interactive, differentiated, collective, highly normative, asymmetrical, inherently conservative, jointly constructed, immediately significant. In the course of explaining his propositions, Green articulates the definition of the classroom situation in the form of metaphors that can provide directions for exploration and examination within the current language learning process, thus suggesting a possible future investigation for the culture of the language classroom, will be more of a revelation rather than just identifying it as a metaphor. In the attempt to relate Green's metaphor to the contemporary reality of classroom situation, Green's metaphor could be extended to include the classroom as terrarium, where a terrarium is a miniature version of an actual ecosystem similar to Green's metaphor depicting the coral gardens with a collection of small plants growing in a transparent container. Reading thus becomes an essential skill to negotiate the heterogeneous variety of the classroom and also to provide effective student-centered learning. 1.3 Developing reading skills. There are 4 major English language skills which must be developed for complete and holistic language learning and language acquisition. These are listening, speaking, reading, and writing. While all 4 are equally vital and important for the learner across disciplines, reading is an indispensable part of the learning process, and every education program considers it as a priority. Among the key goals, subsequently, the development of powerful reading skills in learners is essential and indispensable. It is through reading that students augment their vocabulary and acquire fresh knowledge of life and the world. Reading is also the primary prerequisite for one to improve in terms of comprehension, spelling, vocabulary, and writing. If not addressed adequately, poor reading skills can adversely impact the performance of learners across a wide variety of curricular disciplines and have a negative impact on both self-motivation and self-esteem. Reading begins with mastering pre-literacy skills, including learning the alphabet and achieving phonemic awareness. This is followed closely by phonetic and phonemic instruction through human or technological sources, and this imparts to learners the skill of mapping recognition, how to match sounds to letters and pronounce words loudly and clearly, understanding the subtle differences between long and short sounds, vowels and consonants. As a beginner, reader gains familiarity with the language and acquires more vocabulary. The process of mapping recognition of sound to word accelerates through the process of full word recognition or sight reading. This can be encouraged through direct instruction in high-frequency vocabulary or even multi-usage vocabulary. When learners move to higher levels of linguistic familiarity, they are motivated and guided to achieve holistic comprehension through reading, and this includes understanding complex texts and processing more information in shorter amounts of time. Being a fast and efficient reader is important not just for classroom-based lessons but also for satisfying requirements of assignments and performing well in standardized exams. However, learners develop and improve their reading skills at different speeds and thereby exhibit different levels of fluency and comprehension. Learners may be considered to be ready to further develop the skill of reading accurately and appropriately when they identify and differentiate both vowel and consonant sounds in English, associate vowel and consonant sounds with letters, identify and differentiate among consonant combinations, identify and articulate the vowel combinations, identify rhyming words even when spelt with a different letter pattern, identify upper and lowercase letters as well as italics and the basic punctuation marks in a text. Achievement of the above indicates that the student has acquired the basic skills of reading. However, there are 3 common difficulties encountered during the acquisition of reading skills. Challenges of decoding. This refers to the process of reading and pronouncing words. Decoding occurs when learners are able to put sounds to letters in order to pronounce written language. It's common for non-native readers to face acute difficulty and confusion when they encounter new or unfamiliar expressions, and even when they come across homonyms, or the issue of different sounds made by the same vowel in different words. Inadequate or faulty comprehension. Reading involves a process of negotiation, from recognition of letters and words to understanding the meanings of phrases, sentences, and paragraphs. When a non-native reader encounters vocabulary he or she does not know or does not recognize due to inaccurate decoding, he or she is likely to skip and progress to that part of the text which is simple and familiar. The more blanks in a line of text, the more difficult is the complete comprehension, and the more cognitively challenging and frustrating the reading task becomes. To overcome this, the non-native readers need to identify the gist of the passage and highlight the main ideas along with specific details, and even infer speed. When learners expand their vocabulary, they recognize more words by sight, and the process of reading is accelerated. With copious amounts of reading, the learner's exposure to unfamiliar terms is more likely to increase. Quite often, the context in which these new words are found gives readers many of the clues they need to grasp the meaning. Reading is a cognitively demanding task, and absorbing so much information in the mind while continuing to process text can exhaust non-native readers. Thus, the speed of reading must be moderated by the readers according to their states of proficiency. The reading spelling correspondence. English is full of silent letters and unexpected sounds. Many a time the learner is compelled to simply memorize the spelling of a word in order to recognize its written form in the future. Another reason why English is not the easiest language for initial readers is because of the lack of exact correspondence between letters and sounds. In other words, there is more than one way to spell the same sound. This causes acute confusion and extreme difficulty for non-native English users. 1.4 Classification of reading techniques. Reading can be classified into three kinds: extensive reading, intensive reading, and oral reading. Extensive reading refers to a culture and practice of reading through cultivating the habit of copious reading. In this approach, there is no overt focus on teaching reading or implementing reading within an instructional setting. The best way for learners to improve their reading skills is to read a variety and a large quantity of comprehensible material according to their respective levels of linguistic proficiency. Intensive reading refers to the practice of reading skills in an instructional setting. Readers are exposed to a variety of materials and assigned activities, such as answering comprehension questions on the passage they have read. Learners need to look for critical information in the passage they are reading and make inferences, etc. Intensive reading is instruction-based and forms the core of improving reading skills. Oral reading does attract attention in multiple learning contexts. It is an integral part of reading, especially in non-native English language contexts. 1.5 Reading Readiness Exercises. Before reading, one must ensure that the learner is ready to read. This can be accomplished by initiating the process of what is commonly known as reading readiness. Reading readiness exercises enable learners to recognize and read the letters and words, and thereby mapping recognition is solidified in the mind. Reading readiness exercises may or may not use linguistic materials, but must in every way possible be facilitating and familiar to the learners. The learning outcome of reading readiness exercises is to help foster a congenial atmosphere for learning reading and to develop motivation and interest towards reading. Some of the reading readiness exercises are visual discrimination, auditory discrimination, memory training. Visual discrimination, directions like same, different, top, bottom, middle, first, second and last, etc., referring to objects, letters and words are presented in these exercises. In English, for example, the students need to distinguish between P and Q, between D and P, etc. Names and shapes of the letters of the English alphabet, different forms of the same letters, upper and lower case, etc. The ability to tell whether two letters or groups of letters are the same or different are all focused in the process of visual discrimination. Some possible discriminations can be checked through questions like which letter is at the top, at the bottom and in the middle of the page, or which object is the first, the second and the last, or are any of the objects, letters, or words the same as the one in the box, or even pair the capital and the small letters as provided in the examples given in the text. Auditory discrimination. Although the auditory discrimination exercises are part of the preparation for listening, these need to be used as reading readiness exercises also. This is important for those learners who hear or repeat a sound persistently incorrectly. Many learners mispronounce the J sound for the Z sound and say zero instead of zero. There is a close relationship connecting the auditory image of the word, its reading and reproduction in writing. Each word has its own auditory image, and this auditory image needs to be retrieved correctly in the reading process to avoid its mispronunciation, misreading, and misspelling. Some possible exercises are minimal pairs like bit and beat, initial sounds of successive words, rhyme words, similar or parallel sentences, etc. Memory training. This training helps learners in mental retention for a short but significant period of time of facts and data in a text while reading or even after reading. Some such exercises that you are likely to encounter are: repeat the first 3 sentences of the first paragraph after completing a reading. Sequentially narrate in brief the chronological order of events in a story that has been read. Name as many of the objects from memory as possible after a picture has been shown related to a story that will be read. 1.6 The reading process. As you attend the sessions at your study center, you will find that there are 4 steps followed in a reading lesson. Introduction. Here the tutor explains the purpose for reading the selected textual extract or portion and gives you all a setting for the text to be read. Then the tutor presents a background of appropriate information for the text to be read and selects as well as introduces the new vocabulary necessary to comprehend the main ideas in the text. The reading. This is generally an oral exercise for the beginners, usually consisting of listening to the passage read aloud or listening and following along. Later on, reading is procedural and repetitive or slow and silent. Comprehension tasks. After one or more readings are done, certain questions are set on the passage studied in order to elicit factual or inferential information based upon your understanding of the textual extract. Review and related exercises. These may consist of summary, review, stylistic analysis, precise writing, and other formative and summative exercises to enhance your understanding and to evaluate your ability of comprehension and identification of salient points of the reading passage. During a reading lesson in your sessions at the study center, the following steps should be carefully followed. In the study center, as the tutor reads aloud, you all should listen attentively. and follow the text as the lines on a page are progressively pronounced or spoken aloud. The tutor will occasionally stop to highlight the meanings of words in between the reading and engage in discussion on specific portions during gaps in reading. The tutor will read and encourage you all to repeat, listen, and read along, following his/her pronunciation, and then proceed to make you all highlight important portions. The tutor will elicit questions or conduct a discussion on stylistic or grammatical points of importance. The tutor will generate and supervise discussion on theme and content. As all of this happens, you all are encouraged to either read silently or practice reading aloud individually with the tutor's permission. 3 types of questions may follow from the tutor for discussion: informative or factual, those which begin with what, when, where, who, how many, etc. Inferential, those questions which may be answered by evaluating the information given, such as, did the hero feel scared by the villain's intimidating manner and aggressive threats? Interpretative, questions relating to the author's opinion and a reader's judgment about the style and content of the text. 1.7 Stage 1 of the reading process. Elementary reading. Reading by English language learners can be understood as a skill acquisition process in 3 stages. In the first stage, which is usually referred to as elementary reading, the learners are taught the process of associating the letters of the English alphabet with their relevant sounds in appropriate contexts. In this process, they discover the relationship between the alphabet and the spoken language. Readers are given sets of simple words, phrases, and sentences with the focus being on 1 or 2 letters and their combinations. They are introduced to the correspondence between the individual letters and their combinations in slow and graded steps. They come to internalize, in an inductive manner, the possibilities of sound values for each letter or combination of letters. This leads to an emphasis upon decoding graphic information from the words, phrases, and sentences. With their newfound familiarity and ability to form correspondences, learners then begin to read new combinations of vocabulary and sentence structures. They are now able to accurately predict the sound systems represented by the letters and their word formation combinations in various contexts. There may be various types of elementary readers, ranging from a child or an illiterate to an adult second or foreign language learner of English, who is not proficient in the target language. He/she may be highly educated or a moderately educated person in his/her own native language. At the beginning level, irrespective of age and background, the focus must be mainly on the mechanics of reading. The beginner needs to learn about the relationship and the correspondence between the letters of the alphabet and the spoken language. Before reading skills are developed at the beginner's level, learners must note and follow these guidelines. The tutor or the instructor must have adequate knowledge of the academic and linguistic background of the beginner reader or non-native speaker. The reading task involves decoding the system of abstract symbols to discover its relation to the spoken language system and thus association and correspondence must be imbibed and imparted correctly. The time taken to master the practice of association and correspondence will differ with age, maturity, previous experience, and other social factors. With primary emphasis on mechanics, learners can excel in the mechanics of reading in a few months. Words which express familiar meanings or meanings which can be recognized are retained in memory and thus must be chosen judiciously. The choice of words must focus on the text to be studied. At this stage, such words must be avoided as those which may have the Same spelling in English as well as in the learner's language, but are read, pronounced differently. 1.8 Stage 2 of the reading process. Intermediate reading. The intermediate reading stage fosters interest in reading and develops the actual reading skill practiced throughout the learner's lives beyond mastering the association between letters and sounds. Intermediate readers read silently and confidently predict the sound values of letters and their combinations, and they begin to read for academic purposes. Emphasis here is on developing additional reading skills towards reading with a purpose. In the intermediate reading level, the learners progress to reading advanced English passages with the emphasis being on overall comprehension and retention. This focuses on the development of study skills and textual organization. At the intermediate stage of reading, learners should read such content that introduces them subtly to the grammatical and stylistic conventions of English. Reading should be done in a way that through these passages, learners can internalize the grammatical structures of English. These structures of English are linked to the reading process and the goals of reading. For example, learners may understand through reading practice that certain phrases predict the transition in information discussed in the reading material. In this stage, the following pre-reading guidelines should be followed. The learner should read and examine the title and the headings for each section and attempt to predict what the passage will have as its central theme. The learner should read the first and last paragraphs and the first sentence of each paragraph to attempt to predict the focus of the passage. The learner should read the title and skim the passage to circle all the words that may have a connection with the title. The learner should scan the passage and highlight all the words that are unfamiliar. The learner should then do a second reading of the passage and guess or conjecture the meanings of these unfamiliar words in the context of the passage. However, if the meanings are still elusive, then the words must be looked up in a dictionary. The learner should try to think about and analyze the nature of the content in the passage after reading, fiction or non-fiction, etc. The learner should also contemplate after reading why would somebody read this passage, for information or pleasure. The learner should try to tell a story about the background of the reading passage or create an alternative ending to the passage in a conversation with friends after reading is complete. In the intermediate stage, several intermediate reading skills can be acquired through these procedures. They are reading with incomplete information, organizing for careful reading by skimming and scanning, organizing information, reading critically, developing effective personal reading strategies, establishing effective and differentially paced reading for different kinds of reading. In the reading process, at the intermediate stage of reading, the success of a learner depends a lot on the initiative he or she is willing to take and the positive attitude that is inculcated towards reading. The learners should recognize the pivotal role reading plays in improving their diction and pronunciation, even as it helps them internalize the structures of English. The learners should discover for themselves how rigorous reading habits help them enhance their linguistic and academic performance in English in a holistic way. Reading materials are easily available and a plethora of daily, relevant and engaging material in our surroundings can be used to our advantage in order to understand better both culture and literature. If the reading materials chosen are relevant and fulfill the learner's needs, they will help develop an interest in reading and also improve their optimal reading speeds. This is also another focus at the intermediate stage of the reading process. 1.9 Stage 3 of the reading process. Advanced reading. In the intermediate stage, most learners are content with their achievement of personal reading as it is both fluent and purposeful compared to the elementary stage of the reading process. However, reading is a continuing process, and despite their feeling of accomplishment, learners must necessarily move on to the reading of authentic texts for specific purposes. Stories retold, as well as abridged and adapted versions are focused in the intermediate level, but at the advanced level, originals are studied and exhaustive reading becomes important. Advanced reading is therefore a stage of the reading process that is based on a wide variety of authentic texts and on tasks that represent how a learner would negotiate these texts in a real-life situation rather than a conventional assessment exercise. The aim of advanced reading is to go beyond mere understanding and delve deeper into layers of meanings, references, and suggestions implicit in a text. Learners need to form individual opinions about the text or express personal responses to the text in terms of interpretation, evaluation, criticism, and application of other contexts or disciplines or situations. Advanced reading leads to complex thinking and is simply a preliminary step towards further learning of various skills and purposes. 1.10 Reading through stories. Short stories serve as a relaxing break from routine, lengthy and academic texts, as well as interesting lesson exercises. Selection of short stories for reading by adult learners is different from selection of materials by children because the former might lose interest if the text is too simple, and the latter may do the same if the text is too difficult and abstruse. While adult readers select appropriate short stories, the following factors come into play. Complexity of vocabulary. The story should have enough words that the majority of the readers are able to understand, while at the same time include sufficiently complex words which they can decode. Simplicity of language. The stories should not have too many idioms or arcane and archaic language, as that might also be too difficult and disinteresting. Relevance of theme and content. The content should be relevant in such a way that topics of relationships, business situations, family life, or even something personal and intimate can be related to by the readers, culturally and professionally. Potential for discussion. The story must provide interesting themes or discussion questions keeping in mind the contemporary situation and critical thinking. Reading is thus an exercise that can be enhanced through several procedural steps by various strategies and activities structured to develop effective reading skills that will eventually form the basis for the development of communication skills and self-expression through appropriate vocabulary. 1.11 Summary. In this unit, we have discussed the various aspects of the process of reading. The highlights are as follows. Reading is a crucial skill to address the demands of educational coursework, as well as professional spaces, and also to ensure effective learning coupled with personal enrichment. Reading begins with mastering pre-literacy skills, including learning the alphabet and achieving phonemic awareness. Reading can be classified into three kinds: extensive reading, intensive reading, and oral reading. There are 4 procedural steps in a reading lesson, and it consists of 3 stages: elementary, intermediate, and advanced. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates.